Hi you guys, I'm Amanda Lee from Sugar Cake School, and in this video we're going to be talking all about covering a foam dummy with frosting the fuss-free way. Now if you ever tried to cover a foam dummy or a foam tier with frosting, you will know how frustrating it is. The weightlessness of the foam dummy makes it extremely difficult to cover beautifully with your frosting. So I'm going to be showing you a side-by-side comparison of all of the different tools that you can use to make your life easier and to make this a really smooth and quicker process. And so let's dive into our tutorial. So here's everything we're going to be doing in this video. First up, I'm going to show you the most common mistakes bakers make when covering a foam dummy, basically what to avoid. And then I'm going to show you a couple of tools that will make the whole process go a lot more seamlessly, exactly how to use them, how to make it work for you, how to get a perfectly circle cake and not get those finger marks when you're lifting the cake off the board. And so most bakers would like to decorate their foam dummies this way. They apply a little bit of buttercream. This is Swiss meringue buttercream. Some people like to use ganache as well, and they try and anchor the cake down onto the cake board and then start covering it with frosting. And so doing this, however, is really tricky because this is really, really light. And unless you're using a lot of frosting at the bottom, it's going to want to move. See how I just tried to apply my frosting and it's already been knocked sideways off the cake board. And so if I keep going with this, this is just going to make this whole process really frustrating. You see, I can't actually get any control of it because it's turning, it's moving around. It's just not ideal. And so this is a method that I would not recommend for covering your foam tier with frosting. There is a much easier way. Now, a very common tool that a lot of bakers like to use is something called a foam impaler. Typically is a metal plate with 3 spikes coming out the middle. And then the way it works is that you would push your cake foam into that, and then you can decorate your cake. And so this gives it some sort of a base. It doesn't move around. You see, if I try and push it with that, it goes with the cake plate. So this is going to solve the problem of it not moving around. However, one issue that happens with this is that the plate, if not stored properly, can actually bend, and that's going to give you a lot of issues covering your cake. I'm sure you can see it in the video here how there is a gap here, and this side there is no gap. So basically my plate is crooked, and it arrived in the mail this way because I purchased it from an online store. And so I was very, very disappointed when this arrived, because this basically meant that when I try to frost my cake later on and scrape the buttercream off, so whilst on this side it is quite flat, I'm going to get a smooth side here. But on this side where there is a bend and the plate's lifting up, my cake scraper is going to bend this way, and it's going to lead to a very unevenly covered, crooked looking cake. And that is just a huge problem. So the real issue with this foam impaler is when you actually get a cake covered, now the step is to actually get this covered foam dummy off the foam impaler and onto your cake board, or onto another tier if you are stacking a multi-tiered cake. And so of course there is a method to do this, but it is very, very finicky. And so just to illustrate, your first step would be to cut slightly around the bottom just to separate the buttercream frosting from the bottom of the cake. And then it is the case of lifting the cake off the foam impaler. Now, this is quite tricky to do because the foam is not stuck on loosely onto the base. It is pierced through those sharp nails that you saw before. So it is very, very securely on there. So of course there is a method to do this. However, it is just very, very fiddly. And so the best thing to do would be to use some spatulas. Offset spatulas work fine. You want to stick one on either end, and it's just a case of trying to jimmy this off the base. And so you will absolutely get some sort of ding or marks around the base, which you'll have to fix later on. This is easier if the cake is very, very cold and you've set the buttercream in the fridge. And so basically you want to get it off the board like so. And when you can use your hands, or you can use a lifter to do this. So you can use a lifter or a scraper like this. And it's just a case of lifting this off the foam impaler and placing it onto your cake board. And so as you can see, it's a messy job. So definitely got some marks on there. And so this is the main issue with using a foam impaler for covering and decorating a foam tier. So to combat all of those issues with covering a foam dummy, to stop it moving around and to get a really seamless cover, we need to use something like this. Now, this is a new cake tool from Prop Options. It is called the Cake Compass, and it is seriously game-changing when it comes to covering your foam dummies with frosting. It just takes all of those discrepancies out of the picture. And so there are quite a few bits involved to this set, but I'm going to demonstrate the whole process to you. And so the first thing that I'm going to be using is this cake plate over here. Now this cake plate will essentially sit underneath the cake, directly underneath the cake. And so it just threads through. And so that is the baseboard. And if you can see here, there are a lot of measurements on here. So you can always get the tier perfectly centered every single time. And then there is this removable metal plate down here that is holding everything together. And the idea is for the foam dummy to be sitting on top here. And when you decorate it, you're going to have this plate at the bottom here as a guide. And the genius people at Prop Options have made this so that it can be 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch wider than the cake tier. And so you can see here there is a little bit of give. And so when I apply my buttercream, I can completely use that as a guide and I'll get a perfectly circle buttercream coverage. And so the way to use this is to first have your foam dummy and then to place the cake plate on top of the foam dummy. And so you want to position this with that little rim, allowing for the buttercream to go on it. So once I'm happy with the position of my cake plate, then I'm going to place my cake halo on top. You want to line up the little holes that are on there with the holes that are on the cake plate. Once it's lined up, you can then insert the metal attachment. Just thread it through the holes, and then it's so easy, just push down. There are little knobs here for the feet, which makes lifting this off from the surface of your bench very, very easy as well. And so here I've got my perfectly aligned, anchored foam tier that is now ready to cover with buttercream. Now that we've finished covering our cake, it is now time to lift this off the cake halo, and we're going to transfer it either to a cake board if that's what you want to do, or we can transfer it to another tier if we're going to stack a multi-tier cake. And so the very first thing we have to do is to, again, loosen the cake frosting from the board at the bottom. And so I'm just going to do this by running a very sharp knife along the bottom. I'm going to try and press down as much as possible to get a clean cut. Okay. And so the next thing we need to do now is to lift up, not the cake, but the board that is sitting on top of the cake halo, the guide board. So I'm going to do that with my cake spatula, and it is a little bit easier if you've got two. So it's just a matter of sliding this underneath the circle guide on both sides. And you see, I'm not actually touching the cake at all. I'm touching that acrylic guide at the bottom. And so we're not damaging the cake. And so just shimmy it off. And this is going to separate the foam dummy from the metal spikes at the bottom. And so I can actually lift this whole thing right now without damaging the frosting on the cake. And so once you've got your cake off the cake halo, you can actually transfer it onto a cake tier or onto a cake board. And so if you like, you can apply a little bit of frosting at the bottom to anchor it down if you are transferring it to the cake board. And then you want to gently insert the tip of your offset spatula to the back of the cake. And it's just a case of sliding it onto the cake. And you can reposition it however you like. Make sure it's in the center. And you see, by doing that, we are having very minimal damage to the cake. We're not using fingers or trying to lift it and get it off the foam impaler. And so it's a very gentle glide onto the cake board. And you see that we get such a neat, seamless finish on that foam dummy cake. So thank you for joining me in this tutorial. If you enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and leave a comment down below. If you'd like to keep in touch with me, you can find me here on YouTube at Sugar Cakes or on Instagram at Sugar Cake School. And see you guys next time for another tutorial.